Brothers and sisters, as I told the children this week, next week, Jesus is going to ask the question twice now, what do you want me to do for you? The question, though, I'm going to ask us, that's for the kids to deal with, is this. We're going to learn, everyone, from last week to this week, what is it that Jesus wants of us? Okay, you can think about the other question, what would you ask of Jesus? That's yours. But what does Jesus want of us? Let's go back to the gospel of last week. And of course, the question of a rich young man is this, what must I do to inherit eternal life? You heard it. Keep the commandments. Okay, honor your father and mother. Don't steal, don't defraud, don't cheat, don't lie, etc., etc. But then, of course, there's that one other piece, that one piece that man had. And I ask us to consider that. Okay, the man says this, I've done that. Is there anything more? And Jesus says, yes, there is. There's one thing. You have a lot of money. Go sell what you have and give it. Okay, if Jesus said, okay, you keep the commandments, good. But here's that one other thing. What would that be? And that may be the thing that we have to work on the rest of our life. Okay? But that's what we have to do. What is it? So keep the commandments. Think about that one thing. Here, though, this week in the gospel, we hear about two more important things. We hear, first of all, in regards to what is it that Jesus wants of us? Well, for us to get to that, first of all, we have to understand where we've been. Let's think about this. 3 times, Jesus has told his disciples that he will suffer and die. How has that gone? First time, I'm going to suffer and die. Peter pulls him aside, rebukes him. Second time, I will suffer, I will die. How does that go? Well, the disciples talk about who's the greatest. Lo and behold, before this gospel, right here, 3rd time, Jesus tells his disciples, I will suffer, I will die, and I will rise. And where does that lead? You heard it. James and John. Jesus, we want the glory. Grant that we sit at your right. Grant that we sit at your left in the kingdom. Don't you feel bad for Jesus? I mean, 3 times. And I mean, you talk about getting punched. Okay? Rebuke, greatness, and ambition. But Jesus is that great teacher, and he teaches. And he's honest. He says, James and John, that's not mine to decide. But he tells them this, can you drink the cup that I will drink from? In other words, can you suffer? Of course they say yes, without really knowing what the question is. Because remember, when all of a sudden Jesus does suffer and die, they scram. But you know something, everyone? In the end, they get it. Okay? I did a church the other day, and I don't know if anybody's really talked to you about the different symbols back here, but what do these symbols imply, everyone? Well, the outer symbols are the 4 Gospels. If you want to know who they are, just look at the 4 stained glass windows as you go out. You'll be able to see them. You'll see the different symbols, the ox, the lion, the man, and also the eagle, and they will tell you who they are. So these 4 tell us about the evangelists, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Here's the story, though, inside of the 12 disciples. In the end, James and John would get it. Okay? Here's John's story, everyone. For those of you who can't see it, it's a cup, and on top of the cup there's a snake. They actually tried to poison John. Okay? They actually tried to kill him by poisoning. Because after Jesus dies, rises, sends Pentecost, he goes out and he preaches it. And he preaches it so well, they want to put him to death. So how do they try to do it? By poisoning it. But they can't kill him that way. The only disciple, by the way, to not be martyred was John. He dies in exile, though, because of what he preaches. Okay? That's John. His brother James, everyone, dies by the sword. And I just kind of looked at this real quick. I'm not going to say it might be spot on, but this is a good chance this might be James. Okay? Because there's a sword there and there's a Bible there. If you want to see if I'm right, and I might be wrong, pull out your directories. Your pictorial directories. They're in the front. And just go through them. You realize some pretty gruesome. There's a saw. Yes, one of the disciples was actually sawed. Okay? I'm not saying I'm right, but he dies by the sword. So in the end, he gets it. James and John, they figure this out. We're going to have to suffer to proclaim Jesus. By the way, last week, it's fascinating. I didn't read you a long form of the gospel, but Jesus tells them we're going to suffer, die, and rise. And Peter says we've given up everything. Listen to what Jesus says to Peter. This is what he says. There is no one who has given up house, brothers, sisters, mother, father, for my sake, who will not receive 100 times more houses, brothers, sisters, mothers, children, lands. Here it is. With persecutions and eternal life in the age to come. There it is. Jesus promises, give up things for me. I'll give you a lot, but you're going to suffer. James and John did in the end, and they inherited eternal life. Suffer. Okay? The second thing we're called to do, everyone, is we are called to be servants. And I'm going to share a story that I shared with the people last night about George and Fred. All right. It was Sunday, everyone, and George was walking along on the sidewalk, and he notices there's Mass. So George says, I'm going to go to Mass. So he comes in the church, everyone, and as he comes in the church, he goes down the middle aisle. Well, as he goes down the middle aisle, he tries to get into a pew, but the people won't move over. We get a little Loctite sometimes. Okay? They don't move over. So he keeps coming down, they won't move over. Well, see, the story of George is this, everyone. He was homeless, so his clothes were tattered, and he hadn't bathed for days. All right. But George keeps going, and he goes, and he goes, and he goes, everyone. Nobody moves over, so finally, what does he do, everyone? He gets up into the sanctuary, plops down, and sits down. It's homily time. Priest is ready to give the sermon from the lectern, everyone, from the ambo itself, and there is George. Boom. What do you do? Well, the people are stunned. Okay? So all of a sudden, Fred, an usher, has been usher for years, in his Sunday best, gets up and starts to walk forward. Okay? Now, realize Fred is up in age, so this takes a while. Okay? And as he's going forward, people are saying, yes, yes, finally somebody to clean this up. Kick him out. Boot him out. Well, when Fred gets to the front, guess what he does? Boop. Sits down right next to George. He says, welcome, and I'll sit with you the rest of Mass. There's the priest up there at the lectern, smart enough to realize this, and he says this, people, what I say today you will never remember. But I tell you this, what you have seen you will never forget. And I bet you they never did forget. See, that's what we are. We're called to be there for each other. And that's what Jesus says. Greatness is about being a servant. Being there for the power of each other. So last week, Jesus told us, this is what I want of you. Commandments. Think about that one thing that keeps you from me. And this week, he adds two more important pieces. Service and suffer for my sake. And if we do that, everyone, with James and John, we will inherit eternal life. Okay? So think about that, everyone. Pray about it today as we once again celebrate our journey to eternal life.